What horrid secrets do your parents have and are oblivious to you being aware of? Someone tried to kill my father when he was in his teens. He has scars on his head from where he was beat with a hammer. He doesn't know that I know this, and I only know because I overheard a conversation between my grandmother and her brothers about the incident. My dad had a similar situation, has a couple soft spots on his head from being bashed with a brick for supposedly sleeping with a co-worker's wife in the military. He wasn't. I found out from my mom, his wife at the time, now ex, that he eventually did sleep with her as a frick you. My dad died when I was 14 and everyone refused to speak of it. My grandparents said he fell down the stairs, and Thief maintained that to this day. My mom told me that he accidentally hung himself, and she'd tell me when I was older. It took 9th grade me all of about 3 days to figure out he had died of autoerotic asphyxiation. She confirmed it years later. My mom had to do some soul searching for AA. She wrote a list called Life Resentments, and having kids was the first bullet point. Found it while I was looking for my social security card to apply for my first job at 16. She kept it in a safe. My mother told me the scars on her arm were from an accident, but they were clearly from one or multiple suicide attempts. I knew when I asked, but I'll let her lie. Edit. Wow, I didn't check Reddit for 24 hours and all of this is here. 1. Yes, her scars are for sure from suicide attempts. I confirmed with an aunt. 2. Also, they are on both arms. 5 to 7 in all. My dad used to talk about growing up really poor, having to get food from food banks, etc. It's one of the reasons that, now that he owns his own business, he donates to food banks and all sorts of charities all the time. Paying it back. Well, it turns out that my father's father owned a massive construction company and made millions of dollars in the 50s and 60s. My uncle was selling massive amounts of cocaine and got busted. My grandfather bankrupted himself paying off judges and lawyers and all that to keep my uncle out of jail for most of his life. That's why my dad grew up with nothing. He has no idea that I know. My father's side of the family is riddled with a grab bag of severe mental illnesses. My father and his older brother in particular got the lion's share, while my father has a progressively worsening, untreated paranoid schizophrenia, NPD, ECT. His brother is likely a bona fide psychopath and sexual miscreant. When we were 11 to 12, me and my cousin Psycho's son spent a summer together because my parents were on the outs and my uncle had a large house in the country and I fit right in with their gang of kids. It was awesome. I spent a whole summer running barefoot in an idyllic Indiana sleepy nowhere town. Right before school was starting back up, and I was about to go back to live with my parents. I was helping my uncle and cousin clear up some old farm junk left by the previous owners behind the barn. My cousin cut himself on rusty farm equipment and my uncle sent him back to the house to have his mom clean him up and maybe go get stitches. When we were alone and saw my cousin get driven to town to get stitches with the other kids in tow, my uncle took me into the barn and molested me. I never told anyone and found out years later that my dad knew his brother was like that and shipped me off to spend a summer with him because my uncle paid my dad in cash to take me off of his hands for a few months. Expenses paid at the price of having free reign to abuse me. I don't know what price my childhood had, but I came back to my parents having a new working vehicle and my siblings had new clothes, shoes, and school supplies, which wasn't common. I know that my mom got pregnant at 15 on purpose. She was constantly being shuttled between early 80s foster care and her own terrible family, and she felt like her only way to escape was to get emancipated through marriage. She knew my dad from school and thought he'd make the perfect husband. Smart, funny, from a seemingly good family, and he had protected her several times. So she seduced him, knowing their parents would insist on marriage if she got knocked up, and she did. Unfortunately for her, he turned out to be a drug-dealing, mentally ill teenager from a dysfunctional alcoholic family. The marriage lasted only a few months, but she did get her escape. My mom has no idea that I know this, and she'd be devastated if she knew. My dad is now with the woman he was cheating on my mom with before she died from cancer. Edit. No, my father is not named Newt, nor goes by Drive. Sus. When I was a child, we used to be semi-close to my dad's family. My grandparents came up 2+ hour drive to talk to my parents about an adult issue, and 10-year-old me was told to stay in my room with the door shut. After that, we never spoke to them again, except for one letter that I got from them expressing sympathy when my other grandmother, who I was very close to, passed away. I had no idea what happened. Years later, I found a cousin on Facebook, and we happened to go to the same college, so we met for coffee. I found out that the reason we no longer spoke was because my mom opened a whole bunch of credit cards and racked up a bunch of debt in my grandma's name that she never had any intention of paying back. My cousin and I kept it between us, and she has no idea I know. Edit: since this blew up, I'm about to turn 30. I have excellent credit, and I check it regularly for any suspicious activity. I'm good, but thank you for all the advice. Found this out from my dad's old college roommate, as my dad has never wanted to talk about this with me. Pops was working in the financial district during 9/11 and was in charge of emergency evacuation for his floor way high up in one of the bank buildings. Saw the towers fall and had to herd everyone off his floor and out of the building. Apparently someone had a heart attack and collapsed behind their desk. He didn't find this person and they ended up dying there in the office. I think my dad might blame himself at least partially, which, on top of the trauma of witnessing the towers fall firsthand, has led him to locking that part of himself away from the world. One day I want to tell him it wasn't his fault and he did the best he could. I went to my parents' room to wake them up to drop me off to school. I saw them out cold, lying naked with a dildo on the edge of the bed. I was 15. My dad doesn't know that I know how my grandfather, his dad, died. I had always wondered why I never knew my grandfather, but it was always a touchy subject, so I never asked. I knew my dad basically grew up without his father, but I never knew why. When I was about 22 or 23, my brother told me what had happened. My grandfather had committed suicide in front of my dad when my dad was about 8 or 9 years old. Even though I know now, I still won't bring it up. Edit: I can't thank you all enough for the outpouring of support and taking the time to share your own stories. By speaking up and speaking out, we can help reduce the stigma of mental health and raise awareness for those who need it. My biological dad died when I was in a car accident going to his next duty station, and not too long ago I got a box of letters he had sent my aunt, uncle and his parents. Since he died when I was so young, I didn't really know him that well, but this treasure trove of letters gave me some real insight into who he was. It was a lot of letters from the time he was in the Navy, before he married my mom, all the way up to not long before he died. In one set of letters he discusses with my grandparents how he and my mom aren't getting along. He mentions that they might get a divorce, but he wanted their help in getting custody of me. I think mostly because my mom was born and raised in Ireland and not yet a true citizen of the US, so he was afraid he'd never see me again if I went with her. Apparently she was fine with him taking me. They reconciled, but it's interesting to know that she would have given me up and did have grown up in LA instead of with her, ultimately on the east coast of the US. I want to preface this by saying I was adopted. My dad was 18 and wanted one last romp with my mom, 17, before shipping off to the military. This is where I come from. She decided to adopt me out so we could both have ECT. He never stopped loving me or thinking about me. I haven't told my adoptive mom I know they hid these, and I may never. Edit: wow. I never expected this to blow up like it did. So I'm going to go through and answer some common questions. Yes, I know my BO dad. We have met and talked several times. We care about each other, but we don't get along. Mainly because he's a gun-toting, God-fearing Republican who voted Trump, and I'm a liberal feminist not radfem, but still who volunteers at Pages. Need I say more? No, I'm not mad at my adoptive parents. I love them very much, and I think my adoptive dad knew somehow that I would be the one to find those. I know my mom and dad are good people. Mom is a bit of a narcissist, but that's another story, and that they were thinking of my well-being at the time. I don't think it's worth bringing up and starting a fight over because it was a long time ago, and, as someone who had never had children, I have no idea what the whole situation was. I'm 31 now, What's done is done. My dad doesn't know that I found paperwork of his from when he got discharged from the military and diagnosed with borderline personality disorder with narcissistic features. Everything about his behavior suddenly made sense, but there was literally no way to bring it up to him without making him extremely more defensive or shutting down on me. It did give me peace of mind, though, and helped me work through a lot of trauma on my end after years of emotional gaslighting. Edit. My father also suffers from Munchausen syndrome, a disorder in which a person pretends they're sick with multiple illnesses, and will even go as far as to have surgeries they don't need, in order to garner sympathy and attention. This is usually done because of extreme childhood abuse and neglect. Has pretended to have cancer, epilepsy/seizures, a blood clotting disorder, etc. Over the years, alas, has still alive, and would walk with a cane. Whenever we went out, that magically disappeared at home. I now realize this ties into his BPD and narcissism as a form of coping. It doesn't make it right, but again, I've come to understand him a lot more these last few years because of it and heal myself. Don't know if it's horrid, but when helping my mother move from one house to another, I happened across her bag of 6 toys, which isn't all that shocking, but it included a strap-on dildo. The bag was open, and it was on top. She'd been a single woman for 20 plus years, and was in her late 50s at the time. I had no idea who she was using it with, nor do I want to know. My parents got engaged after a drug-fueled 11-day bender in 1979. Firstborn came along in 82. Still married. Well, my father sends me letters from prison assuming I haven't heard the phone recordings where he admits to child rape. I burn everything he sends me. Also, I corroborated several claims against him when interviewed by the detective. When my grandfather died, he left approximate $140k American in a trust for me. It wasn't to be touched until after my parents passed away, so that it could gain as much money as possible from the investments he had arranged. My grandfather was an oil tycoon in PA and no one in the family knew it until after he died. I got a call from the bank one day asking how I'd like to handle closing the accounts. I had no idea why, but apparently my parents had been taking medical bills from themselves and altering them to have my name on them, then submitting them to the bank to be reimbursed for paying my medical bills. They had bled the trust completely dry in less than 5 years. They used the money to remodel their home. I don't think I have any recourse. But whatever. I'm 35 and I have my own retirement. It just makes me mad that they would steal from me like that. Edit 1. Added a word. Edit 2. Thank you anonymous user for my first Reddit gold. That means added to me. Not some horrid secret, but I sometimes hear my dad talking behind closed doors to my mom who passed away suddenly years ago. He typically tells her our life updates and that he misses her. My sister got married recently, and I overheard him from outside his room telling my mom how beautiful my sister looked and how great her husband is, that she never had the chance to meet. About how they had always spoke of that moment, watching their child marry, and he wished she was there with him to see us. We rarely speak about my mom at home, but 14 years later she's still very alive in his heart. It's gut-wrenching at times. I found my dad's Yahoo Personals profile, featuring a picture of him bent over in our living room wearing nothing but assless chaps. Profile name Hot Rider for you, and it was taken with my camera. We only had one in the house, but for some reason I decided to check the EXIF. Just hoping. Never mentioned that one to him or my mother. My uncle had just bought this awesome Jeep with huge tires, no top, floodlights, etc. It was bright orange. Me being 9 at the time, when he came over to show my parents, all I wanted to do is take a ride in it. My uncle said it was cool, but wanted my dad to come along with him. It was kinda late, and still kinda chilly. It was western Pennsylvania in the early spring, so I brought a pillow and a blanket. Soon after we left, I fell asleep. At some point, I woke up, because we were stopped. I was really comfortable, so I didn't move when I woke up, but I heard my uncle ask my dad if it was okay to do this with him in the back seat. My dad responded that I was out cold and to break out the coke. I was confused, cause my dad didn't drink pop. but he thought I was asleep, so I just pretended to stay asleep. I then watched as he opened the glove box and started chopping up this white powder that my uncle passed to him. Then he sniffed it up his nose, and my uncle did the same. I thought maybe I was actually still asleep and just having a weird dream. But the memory persisted for years. About 5 years ago, I'm in my late 30s now, I asked my uncle about it, and he went pale. The first thing he said was, "You were awake." Apparently, he had scored an 8-ball and didn't come over just to show off his new Jeep. He was planning to split it with my dad. They actually were snorting coke while I was in the Jeep. Edit: since this blew up, thought I'd share one more detail. I still have the pillowcase I was using that night. imga.com/a/4blige.